Do you ever catch your reflection in the mirror and just be like, hold up, I look terrible. It's like someone's stacked a bunch of bananas on top of each other. It just looks weird and bad, and that's because it is. You've probably even seen a few videos about it before, tried some generic glute exercises or hip stretches, and as far as you can tell, it had absolutely zero impact. This is because the people making that video never actually look like that and don't know how to actually change it. Do you think this guy really looks like this, or ever looked like this? This video is different for one simple reason. I actually used to look like that and stand like that, and now I don't. And that wasn't chance, and that wasn't 10 minutes a day of hip stretches or glute exercises or whatever else is being peddled. There is a method here, and it's almost definitely something you haven't tried before. What is actually going on here? Like, if your glutes are too weak or your hip flexors are too tight, how did they actually get that way in the first place? If we don't understand how it happened, it will happen again. If we treat the symptoms of this and not the cause, we're just going to get the same outcome. Tight hip flexors and weak glutes are symptoms, not causes. So let's get into it. I'll break this video down into 3 parts. 1, how and why this happens. 2, the consequences of this. And 3, how to fix it for good. The third part won't make sense without the first, so don't skip that. Okay, part 1, how did all this happen, really? It starts with gravity. This is the most important force we will ever have to deal with. It is pulling us down into the ground 24/7. Bones on their own cannot hold themselves up. We need muscles to hold against this force, so we pick some. But it's not a conscious choice. It's something that we did at like 4 years old and never considered again. Some work well for this job and are built to do it, so to speak. And others kind of suck at it, especially if they're working alone when they should be working in tandem with some other muscle. However, this is not the whole story. This is half of it. We also picked a position for our bones, just as arbitrarily. And just like muscles, some positions are better than others, because certain positions of our bones make certain muscles work more or less. This is just super important. Drill this into your brain. Our posture, which is basically just how we support ourselves against this gravity thing, has 2 halves. Which muscles we're using and which position we're in, which determines which muscles we need to use. So let's look at the pelvis through this lens. But first a little about its function, its job within the human body. It's basically a bony cup. Its job is to form the base of the support for the torso, the thing we need to move around in space. It connects this torso to our legs, ideally allowing our legs to move around independently while the torso glides around smoothly on top. Eating food, punching things, doing whatever it is a torso likes to do. Where this cup rests depends on the muscles that pull on it and the position of the bones above and below it. In terms of muscles, there are really 2 big interesting groups involved, the hip flexors and the glutes. The hip flexors go from the back of the pelvis and the low spine to the front of the legs, and they support the front of the pelvis. The glutes attach the back of the pelvis to the back of the legs and support the back of the pelvis. Together, these 2 muscle groups form the team that support the front and the back of the pelvis. And these muscles ultimately decide its orientation and tilt. The glutes can push it more underneath you, and the hip flexors can tilt it back. When people, perhaps you, stand with their pelvis tilted way forward, it means the hip flexors have won. They're doing the majority of the supporting, typically holding on in what is for the hip flexors a relatively stretched position. And in this position, the glutes are typically doing absolutely nothing. We can confirm this by just standing up and poking the bottom of our butt and seeing if it's doing anything. It's most likely as soggy as an overboiled noodle. How did they end up winning? Why is it so common? For this, we need to understand position. I've got a very simple exercise for you to do to help understand this, which you actually have to stand up and do if you want this to make sense. So actually stand up for reals, and as you're standing there, I want you to squeeze your bum as hard as you can. Tuck your hips underneath you with a big pelvis movement, as much as you possibly can. Don't bend your knees to do this, just rotate your pelvis. Think pelvic thrust or dog tucking its tail between its legs. Or if you're a guy, someone has tied a string to a particularly sensitive part of your body and is pulling it upwards. Nice. You've engaged the other half of your pelvis support, the glutes. Right now, how much energy is this requiring? How sustainable does this feel? If you stop paying attention for just like 1 second, how long before you go back to your previous position? The answers are lots, unsustainable, and not long. As soon as we get distracted or get tired or lose focus, our glutes are gone, and our pelvis is tilted back to its ordinary forward tilted orientation. This is because our position is making it nearly impossible for our glutes to function properly. Position determines function. Now let's try something different, something very simple. Stand up again, or keep standing up. And make sure you do this because you need to actually experience this for it to make sense. Just go back to your normal position to begin with, then move weight further forward on your feet. Feel weight, heaviness on the balls of your feet. Now keep that weight there. Don't let it move backwards, and tuck your hips underneath you again. Squeeze your glutes. The same pelvis movement with the same amount of effort. Notice experientially how that feels to before. Does it feel any easier? Does it feel more powerful? Does it feel perhaps more sustainable? Do you think if you kept your weight in that position, your glutes could continue to work relatively easily? Feels better, right? That's cool. Now, next part, keeping your glutes on as best as you can, bring your weight back towards your heels. And tell me what you feel in your glutes. And what you'll find, and you don't need to take my word for this because you're actually doing it, that as soon as you moved your weight back, as soon as you changed your position in this way, your glutes turned off faster than me at an HR meeting. Your position determines their functionality. All you forward pelvis tilters out there watching this have one thing in common. Your weight is on your heels all the time, which determines which muscles you're able to use effectively. And the answer is your hip flexors. They are supposed to support the pelvis, but they're supposed to do 50% of the job, not 100%. Until you get your weight in the right place, there is no way they can jump in and do the other 50% of the job. And you can probably see from here what a fix for this might ultimately look like, but there are more important positional details to add, which I will get into after quickly looking at some of the consequences of this position on the rest of the body. And understanding these consequences will ultimately help you correct it too. So again, don't skip it either. Bodies are trying to find balance. They're cause and effect machines. Anything that happens at one part will ultimately have an effect on some other part. So, for example, if I were to tilt my head right, I'll almost instantaneously feel more weight on my right leg, but there'll be other effects, like my left hip might move to the side to counterbalance that movement. So if we tilt our hips forward, what else happens? Well, to begin, as we tilt our hips further forward, our low back becomes progressively more curved. They're literally connected to each other, like the spine joins onto the pelvis. And this low back curve isn't great. One, it'll make you look like you have a belly, even if you don't. But two, it's going to cause a lot of our torso muscles to work asymmetrically. We'll get a lot more work done by our low back extensors as they arch in, and a lot less work done by our abs as they get stretched. And this doesn't just look bad. Biomechanically speaking, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that using your abs less is not great, or increasing the relative load at a single part of your spine. But it doesn't just stop here. This low back curvature too has a reaction in the body. The more curved the spine is at the bottom, the more curved the spine will end up at the top. And this is why this hip tilt often goes with the typical head forward posture you see in a lot of people, which again, I'm sure I don't need to tell you is not great for you. However, this head forward posture is often actually well disguised by people just leaning back more through their low back to give the illusion of being fairly upright, which has the reaction of moving more of the weight of your torso back in space, which is heavy, and putting more weight, you guessed it, back on your heels. And then you can guess what happens to your glutes and pelvis when you get more weight back on your heels. This pattern is ultimately self-reinforcing. But fortunately, so is the alternative. Changing your weight and pelvis position can ultimately work back up this chain, impacting all the other factors as well. So let's get into it. How do you fix this really for good? Well, in some ways the method is simple. Improve your posture. There is a lot that could be said about that beyond the scope of this single video. I'm currently writing an ebook about that topic, so if you're interested in that, check the link down at the bio and sign up to the mailing list to get that when it gets out. Or if you're in the future, get it now. I've also made a bunch of other videos on this topic which are really useful, which I'll link down in the bio too. But in terms of this video, let's get into some ideas. Really, the way we improve our posture is by improving our posture. The method is the result. Things ultimately just aren't used, and the only way to wire them into our central nervous system is to use them. We need to use different muscles and a different position all the time. Stretching and strengthening can be supplementary to this process, but I would say their importance is around 5%, and there are a billion videos on that already, so just watch those and do whatever they say. In terms of how you actually stand better all the time, the devil is in the details. You need to do it right. You'll know it's right because it'll work, it'll be efficient, and it'll be sustainable. So the first and most important step is position. Get your weight further forward on the feet and keep it there all the time. Not so much so that your toes are straining and going white, but so that you firmly feel the ball of both feet on the ground and your big toes actually lightly grounded. Now, there are actually a lot of ways of moving your weight forward by changing your position. You could move the head forward, or lean forward at the hip joint, or move the weight of the rib cage further forward in space, or just move forward over the ankle joints without changing anything above its position at all. In an ideal world, we would do this with our rib cage weight, but honestly, for now, it's just fine to do this using your ankle joint movement. Doing the hip movement forward or the head movement forward are kind of disastrous because both of those will play into the previous patterns we've discussed. Doing the ribcage one badly isn't great either. People often do this by leaning back, which is bringing our weight back. Rather, we want to move the ribcage forwards, upwards, and out, but don't stress too much about that for now. Once we've moved our weight forward, however we did, we then need to bring our pelvis underneath us. Rotating it using our glutes, pushing it up underneath, and using our abs to lift it up a little bit at the front too. There are a few other things to watch out for. Make sure your knees are soft. Having them completely locked back is no good. We don't want them bent either, just a tiny bit of softness. Also, try to get your knees facing straight ahead. Your glutes are also external rotators. So if you're extremely internally rotated on your legs, odds are your glutes could be doing more. Also, check that your hips are in the same plane. Don't let one hip move forward more than the other. Ideally, there'd be a flat line across the front of your hip bones. In terms of the body above the pelvis, there is a lot that we could do. But for most people, making any of those changes is contingent on being much, much better at stabilizing through the pelvis. Start there, get your hips sorted, and if you're feeling fancier, you can check out some of my other videos on the topic, which go into a little more detail. The hips are really the foundation of a stable, balanced torso, and getting them right is essential. It's really a matter of repetition more than anything else. The more you stand like this, the better you'll get at it. It's that simple. Park your weight in the right place to keep them there and you'll be flying. The final thing that can really help is walking well. If you suck at standing because your weight is back and your hip flexor dominated, you're going to suck at walking in all the same ways. In walking, we want to get our weight further forwards and our glutes underneath us, allowing our hip flexors to stretch and relax in every step instead of constantly lifting. But again, I won't go into too much detail on that. You can check this video out if you're interested in learning more about that. So that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. If you're interested, remember to check out my book. The link is in the bio. Otherwise, thanks a lot for watching. I appreciate the support. Let me know what you'd like me to make a video about next. Peace out.